Now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
I'm going to tell you something. If you two ever bother me again the rest of my life, I ain't giving up that stuff. I can't. There's good friends of mine out there to say. Well, he's the boss, you have to do his stuff. That's why I said to you before, you don't understand what the boss is your boss.
To Mob Talk Radio. At this point, I'm going to get into a little thing I was thinking about this week, and we sort of touched on this, but I didn't totally sort of go down that path. And the question sort of became, why be a boss if you don't have to be? And there's a logic behind the power of all of that. And I, have in some ways talked about this before. In different sort of ways and different sort of descriptions anyway. But I always say in a world of organized crime, be a Joe Watts or a Jimmy Burke. And I've also said that it's better to swim in every pool instead of just one pool. And you have to look at history to totally understand the pulse. And what I mean is you have some that historically learned from their predecessors and some who absolutely didn't. Tommy Lucchese is perhaps the one guy who truly learned. He followed the path that was laid before him. He learned from watching Tommy Reyna, how not to spread yourself too thin. He learned from Pinzolo. You better have an idea of where you're going or it's going to have consequences. Then under Tommy Gagliano, he learned how to not overexpand and how to simplify. In other words, oil the gears and expand a little bit outward. Gagliano set the Lucchese's up for success. And rather than, when Tommy Lucchese took over the helm in 1951, officially, he didn't overexert the issues. He didn't overexpand. He took what was before him and just pushed outward a little bit. He knew that with power came responsibility. And he forged alliances that benefited him, never hurt him, and always benefited him. He never put himself in a situation that he couldn't remove himself from. Any move that he made benefited his family. He followed the path that was forged way before him, and he made subtle adjustments. And that's what good bosses do. They think family first. Good bosses don't have to exert pressure when it's not needed. They don't have to come out swinging for the fences because they have nothing to prove. It works, really in two ways. You have people like Carlo Gambino who came along and didn't need to exert power unless it was absolutely needed. And then you have the Nicky Scarfo types who come out guns blazing out of the gate trying to prove how tough they are, to prove prowess. And if you look at all the, if you look at all the bosses historically who shoot first and ask questions later, usually it ends up in one way. They end up in prison. And that's just, kind of reality. It's not to say that those types of things are not necessary in terms of the streets, because they are. But Albert Anastasia, look at how that ended for him. Vito Genovese, look at how that ended for him. Nicky Scarfo, John Gotti, Carmine Galante. And the list just goes on and on and on. Look at the success stories. Gambino, Lucchese, Trafficante, Patriarca, even Carlos Marcello. And those guys all have one trait in common. The bottom line for them was about family first, the family moving forward, and not obtaining absolute power like Napoleon Bonaparte. And granted, many of them attained that power, but they did it by scheming, by planning, by plotting. Murder only creates a schism and a break in continuity in the streets. It's just the reality. But the problem with the life in general is the politics. Everyone wants something from somebody else. Alliances are built solely on profit. If you have an alliance based on profit and not principle, then you're going to have a situation that's not going to work. The Concrete Club gets nailed, not just because of rats, but because it was all-encompassing. And Castellano rigged it so that his end was bigger than everybody else's, which infuriated everybody. It created instability. Paul Castellano couldn't balance it. He just took advantage of it. And it creates a flashpoint or a boiling point. And just because the main goal is money and power, let's not get it twisted, it doesn't mean that you need all of it. And that's where Paul Castellano truly made his mistakes. It wasn't enough to control the unions. He wanted control of all of it. And I understand from the point of view of money. I get it. However, when your hand is in every single fucking cookie jar, you begin to lose sight of others' aspirations. And you begin to move in circles that you do not belong in. And the effects can reverberate in the streets. And I like to use Paul Castellano as a reference point because he had it all. He controlled everything. He stepped into the Gambinos and really pushed the family towards legitimate enterprises. But it wasn't for the family. It was for himself, for his own personal gain. Multiple wiretaps picked up that he was a greedy fuck. He didn't mind fucking over other crime families out of business and money and profits. The bottom line to him was personal gain. And bosses that are like that have problems. Massive problems. And they sort of get a tunnel vision. Castellano had the right idea about controlling industries that before had been simply, elbow room for the mafia historically, but he loses sight of the bottom line. Russell Bufalino took his crime family and about completely legitimized them. By the end of his career, they didn't control anything anymore. Bufalino recognized it. He knew the times had changed, and he made everybody around him beyond wealthy. There wasn't a single guy in that crime family that was not a millionaire at the end of everything, or at least didn't want for nothing. That entire family was wealthy. But that's the thing about organized crime. Money. Money is the root of fucking everything. I consistently talk about smaller crime families and those realities. I posed a question to all of you. Is it worth being a boss in today's climate? And if you look back at the Gotti regime, right? Gotti made the family wealthier than Paul Castellano did. And those are just facts. Gotti had the right men in the right places. Under Gambino, they were pulling in, $400 million a year? Under Gotti, it was over $600 million a year. Now, granted, inflation and changes aside, Gotti had the right people in the right places for the most part. Take away that aspect of Gotti, forget it. And you figure also during the Gotti regime, probably 250 made guys. And that doesn't account for associates. And I think likely, and listen, I can't be 100% sure, but I don't think it would be unheard of if the Gambinos during his reign amassed 500 guys, maybe 250 made, 10 to 12 captains, and a ton of associates. $600 million a year plus. Now, take a small family, maybe 50 made guys, maybe 100 associates. If that, you're going to have 4 or 5 captains. Loan shark and bookmaking extortion. It's a small area. And in this case, you have 5, 6 guys making the bulk of money. Everybody is robbing fucking parking meters, for Christ's sakes. How much money could you really be making if as a boss of a small family? And I'll tell you this, if you're not making north of $5 million a year, what the fuck is the point? And this is why you'll often see smaller families expand into other states or have what they call satellite crews, because it's a way to expand. It's more money. Now, if you compare a smaller family to a big family, what is the point? I understand being a boss of a big family. It makes more sense. If you got 500 guys pushing up $2,000 a month, that's $10,000 a month, $120,000 a year. Is it worth the headaches for $120K? Now let's say you're getting $8,000 a month from 500 made guys. That's $4 million a month. That's $48 million a year. And now you can begin to sort of understand why in other areas or in bigger families, it's a little bit different of a story. So in my opinion, if you have a family under 100 members and you're not making $5 to $10 million a year, what the fuck are you doing? You could rob a bank and make more money. So what's the point? Ego will always out-survive money. Always. So, if you're not pulling in the money, why fucking bother? What if you could be in that life? Make as much money as you want or as much money as you can without having those responsibilities. Guys like Jimmy Burke, who, he did die in prison, was connected to everybody. He wasn't owned by the Lucchese crime family. He worked with all crime families. Swimming in the same pool, you're either a small fish or you're the big fish. Everything in the middle doesn't matter. It's the old adage where, would you rather be a big fish in a small pond or a small fish in a big pond? But I have a third scenario. Why not be the fish who can swim in every single pond? Your loyalty can't be questioned if you're a part of everything versus one thing. You aren't subject to the politics on the streets either. If one family has a beef with another, guys are often told to stay away from this one, stay away from that one. But in the end, that doesn't apply to you if you're not a part. If you're not a made guy. Why do you even need to be fucking made? A gangster is a gangster. Just because you get your button doesn't make you anything other than a recognized figure. And I'm not knocking the tradition. But look at how many gangsters were total street guys and didn't need the member's card to do it. And I get the meaning of it. I get the tradition of it. I get the respect thing. But wasn't Jimmy Burke feared and respected? You can be those things without the tradition. And I guess it truly comes down to semantics really more than anything. But in today's climate, you're better off being a free agent. The truth is, money is everything. And as long as you're bringing it in, sharing it, nobody's going to give a fuck where you eat and who you eat with. But as easy as it is for me to say all of that, I can definitely understand the desire to control every single facet. I get it. We have all pretended as kids to be the leader of this or a leader of that. I mean, it's just nature, right? So I understand the desire, but the reality of that is everybody thinks they can do better than the next prick. Our egos stand before our common sense almost every time. And I've often said Pablo Escobar had more than enough money. And let's pretend that Pablo Escobar at some point says, I'm done, fuck it. I got $300 million. He can walk. He can retire. He can let somebody else take all the risks. He's got more money than he could ever fucking hope to have. But his fucking ego won't allow for it. They forget the most important thing, and that goes back to why they got involved in the first place. Men who entered that life became wealthy, and they walked. Those are the smartest ones. Originally, it was to ensure your family would not struggle, especially when you look back to the golden age of organized crime. They did whatever they needed to do to ensure the longevity and the sustainability of their family. Look at the Gambinos. How many of Carlo's grandchildren were in the mafia? The answer is 0. Paul Castellano, how many of his grandchildren were in the mafia? The answer is 0. Meyer Lansky, 0. Vito Genovese, 0. Raymond Patriarca, 0. Carlos Marcello, 0. Are you noticing a trend? And I'm not saying that organized crime doesn't pay or offer certain things. I'm simply saying in a world of organized crime, be the guy who doesn't need a title. Be the guy who doesn't need a position. Learn from the past. Make the number that you have in your head and walk the fuck away. Pablo Escobar never learned. John Gotti never learned. Carlos Lederer never learned. They never do. Never put ego before principle. If you want to be a gangster, go ahead and be a gangster. But don't avail to yourself bridges that you can only cross if you dine at the same restaurant. Money is only one color. And it's the color that turns the keys to the front door to mansion. And those are facts. Absolute fucking facts. Absolute facts. All right, we're going to take a really quick break, and when we come back, we are going to get into the Q&A portion of the show. Stay tuned on Mob Talk Radio.